They were destroying the Japanese team so badly that their own coach told them to take it easy in the second half. It felt like an odd thing to ask of a team competing at the highest level of competition in the Paralympics. But as the second half ended, despite their coach's request, the Spanish basketball team still demolished Japan 87-20. The team's captain, Ramon Torres, could hardly believe how well they were doing. The matches that followed were closer, but Ramon and his team continued playing incredibly well, and they defeated every other team in their group. After growing up enduring years of bullying for his intellectual disability, Ramon felt like he had finally found his place. And in their final match, despite Ramon sitting on the bench for most of it, Spain defeated Russia 87-63. Ramon accepted his gold medal alongside his team, and as they returned home, Ramon, with his medal around his neck, looked around the airport in awe. He couldn't help but smile as the people at home cheered his name. It was the proudest moment of his life. However, only weeks after getting home, Ramon's father took him aside and told him something that would completely upend everything he thought he knew. Ramon's team was being accused of cheating, and the coveted gold medal that he had fought so hard for was now going to be taken from him. Ramon had a hard time comprehending how suddenly everything shifted for him. Only days earlier, interview requests and sponsorship offers had been rolling in, and he was being hailed a hero for people with intellectual disabilities. But now, the phone calls and attention he started getting were very different. People were still recognizing him in the street, but now, rather than celebrating him, they called him a cheater and berated him for faking his disability. But he wasn't faking anything. After all, he had the scars to prove it. See, ever since Ramon was a young boy growing up in England, he'd always felt different to the other kids around him. But being born at a time when there still wasn't much knowledge or understanding about intellectual disabilities, he spent most of his youth feeling isolated, being forced to sit at the back of the classroom facing the wall, wearing a dunce's hat as punishment from his teachers for not comprehending the lessons. The other kids would laugh at him, spit on him, and beat him. And even when his family did finally get an official diagnosis of intellectual disability, his own dad perceived him as a failure. However, Ramon's mother, on the other hand, didn't treat him any differently. She believed he could do anything the other kids could do. And Ramon's sister, looking past how Ramon presented on the surface, could see that there was strength inside him. Ramon's sister encouraged him to pick himself back up whenever others tried to knock him down, and through time, Ramon started believing in himself too. Ramon was 12 years old when his parents got divorced. He was separated from his sister and mother, and he moved to Spain with his dad. But rather than being the fresh start that Ramon's dad thought it would be, the sudden change left Ramon even worse than before. With nobody there to encourage him anymore, feeling all alone, and now being bullied by kids in a language he didn't even understand. After school, Ramon would sit in the street outside his home throwing stones at the street number. It was cathartic to him. He would see how many times in a row he could hit the number, and after days of practicing, he was actually getting pretty good at it. But soon enough, his dad grew tired of hearing the stones hit the wall. The piercing ding of the stones hitting the number was getting on his nerves. So, he told Ramon to stop. But his dad did something which surprised Ramon. He didn't just order him to stop. Even his dad could see that Ramon needed something to engage with the world on a physical level more so than an intellectual level. And so he took Ramon to the shops, and to Ramon's surprise, his dad bought him a gift: his first basketball. Ramon was over the moon with excitement. It was the first time he'd ever truly felt seen and understood by his father. Ramon didn't let that basketball out of his sight. He'd bounce it everywhere he went, off the ground, off the walls, outside, inside. He'd sleep, even shower with it. And pretty soon, with his constant practice, he became remarkably good at controlling the ball. And as he watched the other kids and practiced throwing at the local basketball ring, it started feeling like the first thing he could actually do better than the other kids his age. And as his dad watched him excel, that's when they discovered Andy, a Spanish foundation dedicated to assisting ID athletes with intellectual disabilities. It was a network that organised leagues, training, competitions, and connected players to coaches who actually understood them. Ramon played through Andy's regional teams, and as his passion for the game bubbled to the surface, along with the toughness and strength his sister had always seen in him, he started breaking free of the self-doubt that had plagued him. Ramon started finding his voice and his confidence. And that's when he met Andy's founder and president, Fernando Martin Vicente. Fernando's reputation was built on opening doors that had been slammed shut on people with intellectual disabilities, a passion which he would say was driven by a deeply personal motivation to help those just like his own daughter who also had an intellectual disability. Fernando was also the president of FEDI, the Spanish Federation of Sportspeople with Intellectual Disabilities. He lobbied federations, assembled squads, pushed for Paralympic inclusion, and promised athletes like Ramon that their talent would never be overlooked because of an IQ test. He was determined to prove that ID athletes were just as capable at competing at an elite level as non-disabled athletes, and Fernando was willing to do just about anything to prove it. Under Fernando's guidance, Ramon's talent exploded. Playing for the FEDI national squad, Ramon became the captain of the team, and he learned how to lead, how to calm a team that's rattled, how to communicate clearly, and how to control the tempo of the game. With each trip, Barcelona, Madrid, then out to Brazil and Poland for ID League championships and friendlies, Ramon met and he earned the trust of his fellow ID athletes. Fernando also started to trust Ramon, and Ramon, in turn, was deeply appreciative of everything Fernando had unlocked for him. But nothing could prepare Ramon for what Fernando would ask of him next. When the letter arrived at his home, Ramon's dad was the first one to find it. With a smile, his dad passed him the letter over the dining table, saying simply, "Ramon, this one's for you." Ramon held it, opened it, and as he looked at the letterhead, he started shaking. He recognized the Paralympics logo, and he knew what it meant. Intellectual disability events had finally been given full medal status at the Atlanta 1996 Games. It was a landmark moment for ID athletes all over the world. And 4 years later, Sydney 2000 was set to introduce ID basketball, the world stage Ramon had dreamed of. Ramon had heard that Spain was searching for players for its ID basketball team to go to the Sydney Games. And now, with this letter, Ramon had been officially invited to be a part of the team. And not only that, but he was being asked to be the captain, under the endorsement of a familiar name, Fernando Martin Vicente, who had apparently also added vice president of the Spanish Paralympic Committee to his growing list of positions of power. As the letters went out, Spain's roster was shaping up to be one of the strongest teams at the Paralympics. Ramon recognised a few names on the list, players he'd played with and against in other top-level ID tournaments across Spain. But there were also some new names, including Adolfo Poveda, a non-disabled player who had been asked to join the team as a support player. See, in the Paralympics, some disciplines, mostly in visually impaired categories, allow athletes to have another person with them in a supporting role. In track, some athletes with vision impairment run tethered to a guide who matches their cadence and brings them to the line. In cycling, vision-impaired riders compete on tandem bikes, with a sighted pilot up front. And in skiing events, vision-impaired athletes follow a guide down the course, taking verbal cues at speed. However, there was a problem with Adolfo Poveda being added to the team as a support player, which is that in events for athletes with intellectual disabilities, there's no such thing as a support player. When Adolfo arrived at the airport with his tickets in hand, ready to make his way to Sydney, it was his first time meeting the team, and it didn't take long for things to feel off. He introduced himself as one of the support players, and he was surprised by how typical most of the other athletes seemed. And when he introduced himself to the captain, Ramon Torres, Ramon seemed a little confused too. Ramon had met a few of the other athletes before. He knew Juan Perica from Barcelona and a few of the others he'd played with in Brazil and Poland at ID tournaments in 1998 and 1999. However, Ramon found himself having a hard time keeping up with the conversations the other athletes were having. And as they filled out their customs declaration forms upon entry to Australia, he and Juan seemed to be the only two in the team who were having a hard time with the paperwork, asking for help while the other teammates breezed through. As a team landed in Australia, they found their accommodation, and Ramon tried to put his concerns to the back of his head. After all, the team was chosen by Fernando Martin Vicente. He must have vetted and confirmed the other athletes' disabilities before recruiting them. He's not the type to make a mistake with something that important and fundamental. Ramon lay down in his hotel room bed and he tried to get some sleep. As the day of their first game arrived, Ramon was feeling more ready than ever. Their first match against Japan kicked off, and the Spanish team absolutely dominated. Ramon played pretty well himself, but as he watched the other players in his team, he felt almost like he was just along for a ride. The chief executive of the Australian Paralympic Committee even stated himself that some Spanish players were so talented they could play in Australia's National Basketball League. Spain's coach even seemed to be surprised by his team's abilities too, telling them at half-time to take it easy in the second half, which Ramon assumed was to prevent the players from injuring themselves before the rest of their games. As the days went by, the Spanish team continued to dominate the competition. But despite the success, Ramon and Juan couldn't shake the feeling like something wasn't quite right, and they started feeling like outsiders in their own team. They found themselves on the bench far more frequently than the others in the team. And even after the wins, Ramon and Juan were the only two who seemed interested in checking out the other sports at the games. The others would go off gallivanting around Sydney, and it was only in the mornings after that Ramon would overhear the others laughing about the parties and nightclubs they went to the night before. Adventures which apparently he and Juan weren't invited to. But despite the cold shoulders of his team, Ramon knew they had to focus. They only had one more match left, the final against Russia. The game against Russia was a lot rougher and more competitive than all the other games prior. Even the strongest players in the Spanish team seemed to have finally met their match. However, they continued fighting, and as the final buzzer sounded, Ramon looked up at the scoreboard and his jaw dropped. 87-63. They had done it. Ramon and his team had actually won Paralympic gold. Ramon could hardly believe it. He embraced with his team, and at the medal ceremony, Ramon stood proudly alongside the others as Fernando Martin Vicente placed the medals around their necks. The Spanish national anthem played, and the team posed for a photo for the Spanish newspapers. Ramon couldn't wait to share the win with his family. When Ramon flew back home, he didn't take off his medal, and after his plane landed and he exited the airport, he was greeted by the proud Spanish people chanting his name. See, by now, the photo of the team had circulated in the newspapers at home, celebrating the team's win, and Captain Ramon had basically become a household name. Ramon lapped up the adoration, while the others in the team seemed overwhelmed and nervous by the newfound attention. But for Ramon, he finally felt respected and appreciated like he never had been before. For a few days, Ramon's life back home became nearly unrecognizable. Neighbors that used to pity him now wanted a photo. His dad kept the kettle hot for visitors, and every time the doorbell rang, Ramon stood a little taller. It was the proudest moment of his life, and he felt like nothing could take that away from him. Ramon was in the living room with his family when he first found out about the article in Capital magazine. Of course, Ramon had been suppressing his own incredulities about his team, but when he saw the truth in bold print, it was far worse than he could have possibly imagined. An inside reporter who had somehow infiltrated the team had uncovered that 10 of the 12 players on the team didn't meet the intellectual disability criteria at all. And there it was, the photo of the medal ceremony, the same one he'd been proud to frame only days earlier, reprinted as evidence. As Ramon made his way through the list, he couldn't believe what he was reading. These weren't just the ring-ins like Adolfo, who Ramon hadn't met before the games. These were people he'd played with for years at the highest level ID tournaments in Brazil in 1998 and Poland in 1999. And at the bottom of the article, there was the name which surprised him the most. The article had been signed off by Carlos Ribagorda. The insider wasn't just one of the support workers, medical staff, or physios who had been travelling with his team. Carlos was one of the players. In the article, Carlos revealed that he was an undercover journalist, enjoying the ride to a gold medal ostensibly to write this bombshell expose. Of course, everything he wrote appeared to be true, but he didn't have any recordings or photos, like one would expect of a reporter investigating this deep undercover. Some felt like he was just covering his own tracks, writing the story only after hearing whispers that the fraud was about to be exposed, trying to position himself as the hero in a scandal he himself was complicit in. After all, he had played for Spain's ID basketball team in multiple games before he was even recruited for the 2000 Olympics. Carlos pointed the finger at FEDI, the Spanish Paralympic Committee, and in particular Fernando Martin Vicente, as being the architect of the fraud. But despite the overwhelming wave of accusations, Fernando confidently denied everything. He insisted he had medical proof, and he initially produced official-looking documents for every player, but they were all lies. It was discovered that doctors had signed off on fake psychological evaluations, and officials had rubber-stamped falsified test results. When the news reached the International Paralympic Committee, Spain was stripped of its gold medal status. Russia, the silver medalists, were offered the gold, but they were given one condition: provide evidence of their own team's eligibility. They quietly refused. The subsequent investigation uncovered systemic cheating within Spain's intellectually disabled sports federation, revealing a staggering number of athletes were ineligible. And it wasn't just Spain either. It was later revealed that nearly 2/3 of all the ID athletes who competed at the Sydney Paralympics weren't eligible to compete. Believing the entire category was irrevocably tainted, the International Paralympic Committee responded by banning all events for athletes with intellectual disabilities. After the scandal, for 9 years across 2 Paralympic cycles in Athens and Beijing, an entire generation of legitimate ID athletes was shut out of the Games. Their dreams crushed. The International Paralympic Committee worked to develop more robust classification procedures and oversight mechanisms, and events for athletes with intellectual impairments were eventually reinstated for the London 2012 Paralympics, but on a limited basis, with only 120 athletes competing in athletics, swimming, and table tennis. To this day, ID basketball has still not returned to the Paralympics. In the aftermath, the investigation into Fernando shifted from cheating to outright theft. Ramon was called to Madrid to review financial documents of government grants he was supposed to have received for his training, but he had never seen a cent. Fernando Martin Vicente, the man who positioned himself as a saint for the disabled community, had used his foundation as a personal piggy bank, siphoning off the money meant for athletes, the funds for equipment, for travel, for medical support, and he funneled it into his own accounts. And with that money, he had built a massive property portfolio and a collection of luxury cars, a lavish lifestyle funded by the stolen hopes of the very people he claimed to champion. The criminal investigation took 13 years until it finally went to trial, and in 2013, all the players and staff were acquitted of any wrongdoing. Fernando was the only one who faced repercussions, if you could even call it that. He accepted a fine of just €5,400, and he agreed to return €142,000 in government funding. But for Ramon, this didn't feel like justice. The years that followed were hard. Ramon no longer felt like he could trust those in power to keep him safe. He developed a drinking habit, and he started hanging around dangerous people in organised gangs. Paradoxically, they were the people who actually made him feel safe. He felt like being associated with those kinds of people, nobody would mess with him anymore. He used the pain of tattoos as an expression of the hurt that was inside him, and he covered just about every inch of his skin. But today, after more than 2 decades defined by the scandal, Ramon is thankfully in a much better place. He's now under state guardianship, and he lives with support workers who help him manage his daily life with his disability. And in 2024, Ramon met face-to-face again for the first time in 20 years with the one person in the world who understood everything he went through, Juan Perica, to play a game of one-on-one basketball together. No crowds, just the only 2 players in the Spanish team who actually deserved a shot at the medals which had been taken from them.